Good morning. Meeting of the Safety Committee is called to order. Mr. Meyer, are there any public comments?
Yes, sir. We have one public speaker registered, Jody Ann. Did I say the name incorrectly? Okay.
Let me take this a little out of order and ask for the approval of minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Are there any changes, comments, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes? Opposed? Abstaining? Minutes are approved. Our public speaker has arrived.
Good morning. My name is Jody Ann Beatty, and I'm here to represent Build Up New York City. Build Up New York City is an alliance of more than 200,000 hardworking men and women in construction and building services. We work to grow and improve the middle class throughout New York City, including Long Island City and Astoria, by promoting good jobs, safe jobs for workers and their families. I want to talk to you about the Court Square City View Tower, 67-story construction going up at 2315 44 Drive in Long Island City. Its developer, Chris Zhu, and his general contractor, New Line Structures. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a carpenter by trade, and I have been involved in construction for over 20 years. It is a brand new construction a few feet away from the elevated subway line in one of the city's most congested transit corridors. It is fair to expect that special care would be taken with this construction, yet there has been at least one stop work order. If they haven't already, New Line Structures and one of its subcontractors will soon come to ask you for a permit to operate a crane to build a 67-story tower. New Line Structures is also involved in construction at 505 West 43rd Street in Manhattan, where they're using a crane. On that project, New Line currently has an open violation for a job. On that job for, I quote, inadequate safety measures operating a crane in an unsafe manner. New Line has also had open violations on a construction at 2807 Jackson Avenue in Queens. Again, let me quote, failure to safeguard persons or properties affected by construction operations. According to a site safety manager, a light fixture was bumped and fell and hit a worker below. Last month, I attended a New York City hearing on violations issued to New Line Structures in September of 2016 when a worker fell 48 stories to his death. It appears as though New Line Structures are arguing that the violations against it...
Can you please conclude your remarks?
I bring this all up to say that you need to subject the application to operate cranes at the Court Square City View Tower construction site to special scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. And rest assured we'll be looking into that. Yes, Mr. Ward.
Does the MTA issue the crane permit in this circumstance? No?
Department of Buildings does. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're ready for Safety Committee's work plan. Mr. Mayor, are there any changes to it?
No, sir. There are no changes to the work plan.
Then the rest of the agenda will trust you to take us through it, but I want to add a word, certainly on behalf of the committee, to commend you and thank you for your service to the MTA and to the members of this committee. When this committee was formed in the wake of some very startling and troubling incidents it was an indication that we were going to take measures to improve our safety profile throughout the agencies very seriously. Your appointment accentuated that, and you've done extraordinarily well in that regard. We of course wish you well. Running safety for all of rails in Washington, D.C. To some degree, you are coming back home, but want you to know that we very much appreciate your service to the MTA and commend you for your groundbreaking role as the very first safety director of the entire MTA.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those kind remarks. I really, really appreciate it.
And you will never have a better job than this.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Mayor, the rest of the agenda is yours.
Thank you. So as we move into the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to mention a couple of substitute faces here at the table for the chief safety officers. Justin Vanashek and Carl Heyman are both away this week. So sitting in for Justin is Matt Peloso and Jim Braunfield for Carl. Hey, exactly. So agenda item 4 is safety metrics. This is one of those meetings where we do not go through the metrics in great detail. So what I would mention is that they are all in the book, and we can answer questions on anything specific that catches your eye if you like. Otherwise, with your permission, we would move on to agenda item 5, safety policy.
If I might. On the issue of subway derailments that are listed here, is it possible in the future to have, like we did with track fires, the cause of them, to have the cause of the derailment? Was it debris? Was it a bad a truck axle on a train? Was it something else? Is there a way that we could have that in the statistics?
If the investigation is complete, yeah, we can surely put them in. No problem.
Yeah,
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I got a question on the metrics here. Since the last meeting, there was 2 deaths on the job in the Transit Authority, and I don't see in the metrics them treated any different than any other incident. Doesn't mean I think you don't treat them any differently, but I want, first of all, assurance that you do treat them differently. You've had a greater level of scrutiny. Perhaps Mr. Byford, I mean, the first thing that happened to him when he came on a job is 2 guys died within a week of each other, I think it was. But I don't see them treated any differently. And as far as metrics go, you know, there's, I almost lost a finger one time. It's dangerous work. People are dependent on each other to keep each other safe, but when it all breaks down and there is a death on the job, me personally, I want to see it treated differently than any other, circumstance on a job.
Commissioner Brown, thank you. Excuse me, Chair. Thank you for raising that issue. I know that the chairman is going to discuss this matter in the larger board meeting in a bit. I think there is an opportunity for us to take your recommendation around fatalities, employee fatalities specifically, and look to see how we report that. I'd like to take the action back to evaluate how to do that as professionally as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
So agenda item 5 is safety policy, and cryptically it says discussion of SMS framework. Safety management is sort of how we have organized our work over the last few years. It organizes itself around 4 components, and so what I wanted to do with this section of the agenda is just sort of remind the committee what those 4 components are and make a few general remarks about each, and then use that as an opportunity to give you an update on a variety of of things that fit into that framework. So first is safety policy. This is the establishing framework for managing safety, and you'll remember that a few years ago we established an all-agency safety policy, and we also wrote a charter for the Safety Council, which is comprised of the safety leads from around the MTA. I simply mention that because in the spirit of the continual improvement, which is a hallmark of SMS, it's time to revisit those. And so that's work that we will be turning our attention to, with an idea of bringing the revised all-agency safety policy and an updated Safety Council charter to the Safety Committee at the next meeting, which is midsummer in July. The basis for the safety policy and the safety charter don't need to change. They're still very accurate, but what does need to change is a little bit of detail to reflect leadership changes around the MTA and leadership changes among the Safety Council. So we'll be working to update that and bring it to you at the next meeting. Which is easy for me to promise as a short timer. I wanted to talk a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, Neil. I wanted to talk a little bit about the safety assurance framework as well, safety policy, safety assurance, where we evaluate the effectiveness of controls and mitigations that are in place. The Safety Council knows that we have been working, a few years ago I gave you a presentation and an update on, at that time, what all of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board safety recommendations to the MTA and the MTA family of agencies, what the status was at that time. We are working on a fairly detailed letter to the NTSB to update that agency on all of the open safety recommendations and to provide them an update on all of our work to address each of those recommendations. And also, I think that will make an appropriate topic for discussion at the next meeting of the Safety Committee. So that work is in progress and nearing completion. The third pillar of safety management is safety risk management, and so I wanted to talk very briefly about two activities that are underway that address risks that we know about. One of them I just mentioned, the NTSB. In light of the Valhalla grade crossing collision, the NTSB found that the penetration of the third rail into the rail car contributed to the severity of that accident, and late summer last year, they asked the two railroads to conduct a risk assessment of third rail arrangements near roadways, near grade crossings. And so I told you at the January meeting, I believe that was, that we had awarded a competitive contract to WSP, formerly Parsons Brinkerhoff, to conduct that risk assessment. And I just wanted to provide you the brief update that risk assessment is nearing completion. The technical work has been done, and the consultant is now finalizing the technical report that will accompany it. Essentially, though, to get to the bottom line on the risk assessment, after an international survey of third rail of rail properties with third rail systems in proximity to roadways, the team was unable to find any other accident in which the presence of third rail contributed to the severity of an accident. And consequently, using the military standard for risk assessments, which is common in this process, the team held a risk assessment workshop on April 11th and deemed the risk to be improbable, and consequently we don't anticipate any mitigation would be appropriate, and we are also preparing to update the NTSB on that work. That was kind of complicated. I should ask if there are any questions before I move on.
Yeah. Mr. Zucker.
David, this is your last meeting, is that correct? So I don't know if this is a fair question to put you on the spot about, but I would love, frankly, whether here or in a session or even a memo or something, I would like some sort of valedictory view from you about where we've come to, or where we've come to from the place you were when you took over, in terms of a safety culture, in terms of the way this group of safety executives works together, And then, frankly, again, happily do it in a separate session. I'd like to also understand what are your views. You've mentioned a couple of things here and there in this conversation about what still are almost open items, but I would actually like it on a more expansive view about where this organization needs to go from a safety perspective. And again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I think I'm asking a lot, but the note came out from Joe, was it yesterday? Well, yesterday afternoon, so I'm sure you haven't had a chance to think about that, but I personally, I think both for this committee and for this organization, management and board would benefit from hearing your views, almost the exit interview, if you will. And with that in mind, I want to thank you for your years of service as well. I know obviously the chair did that, but thank you very much for all you've done.
That request, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. And that request is probably as fair as it is difficult, but it's reasonable, and I'll do it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Pally.
Going back to the issue you just discussed with regard to the third rail and the risk assessment, am I to assume from what you said that the analysis was made of all other rail properties in the world which have third rail, which is a select group of entities? Then there was an analysis of what they do, if anything, differently than what we do at grade crossings, and it was found that they don't do anything differently from a safety perspective, or we don't do anything differently, or finish the last piece of that.
Sure. So a reasonable question that we looked into is, are there safety mitigation strategies that we should learn from? And so
from those properties that use third rail.
Yes.
Because we're not intending to move from third rail to catenary on the system. So the issue is taking the select group of entities that use third rail first.
So yes, we as part of the survey we looked at.
May I interrupt just a second? Please forgive me.
Oh, good.
It may be fair also to add.
Put your mic.
I'm sorry. It may be fair to add in this answer one other factor in this accident, which was the presence of a gas tank through which the third rail passed through. A series of very freak occurrences,
right.
But I think it adds to the understanding of what happened.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor?
So I think that in a sense, an ancillary task was to learn if other properties do things differently than we do. The military standard on doing risk assessments is as you would imagine, a very procedural process, and the very first part is to assess the probability of the hazard, actually occurring, and depending on the likelihood, then to assess what, if any, mitigations may be necessary. And so having judged this hazard to be highly improbable, it essentially rules out the need for mitigations, although it requires discussion and thoughtful consideration, which is what we did in that workshop on April the 11th. There will be a final report coming from the consulting firm, and that will be something we obviously can share with you, and it'll be a lot more instructive than I'm doing now, I think.
So, depending on the width of the road that's crossing the tracks, suspension of the third rail would vary by property, by intersection, by all of those things. Is there any kind of common gap in the third rail that systems use that perhaps we don't? Like, are ours closer together on either side of an intersection? Is there a little more play that is possible without the train losing power?
Since the hazard is judged improbable, we really don't get to mitigations. But that said, what you'll see in the survey results is honestly a much huger variety of third rail arrangements than I would have imagined. Some are much closer, some are farther, some are right side up, some are upside down. I'm as interesting as it is to see all those differences, I'm not sure that it really informs us to take any particular action.
All right. Please. Oh, Mr. Brown, I'm sorry.
Yeah, since you're dealing with probabilities here, I got some mathematical questions for you. other than SEPTA, I believe SEPTA uses the underrunning third rail. How many of these other systems worldwide use that configuration?
There was really a wide variety. There were a few, though, that use underrunning. There were a few that used overrunning, and there were a few that were odd configurations, one even in the ground itself.
Right.
And the mechanism, the shoe mechanism, actually made contact in the ground with the third rail. So very, very wide variety.
All right, wide variety. That's so. Regardless, when you come down to probabilities, your probability based on worldwide consideration of all third rails, and that creates one denominator, and it's a very big denominator. There's a lot of systems use third rail, but there are really not many systems use the underrunning third rail. And I don't like to say all due respect and then show disrespect for whatever statistic you came up with, but if the statistic is based on a universal number of everything that's remotely considered a third rail, and your probability, therefore, you're not going to mitigate if you look at the same statistic based on a denominator of underrunning third rails, you get a much different sort of probability. And I want, when you say the probability, military grade probability is negligible and does not deserve mitigation, is that based on all third rail systems worldwide, regardless of whether they run over,
every single
under,
one we could find, yes.
Well, then I suggest humbly, as a non-mathematician, that whatever probability you have is perhaps less, perhaps there's a greater level of probability than you're considering. And
with
I'm not
no
trying
accidents,
to put anybody.
zero is zero.
0, 0, yeah, 0. So there's been no other underrunning third rail. So yeah, 0 is 0. Yeah, other than ours, that was catastrophic.
There were no other accidents worldwide with a third rail near roadway that contributed to the severity of an accident. And that was exactly the assessment that we were tasked to do, and we did perform.
Commissioner Brown's question supposes, I guess, that in the case of an underrunning third rail, the actual third rail is in a different place than an overrunning third rail. And isn't it just the contact shoe that's in a different place on the train? Isn't the rail in the same position regardless of whether the shoe is above it or below it?
Obviously there's technical answers to that, but even when the NTSB wrote its report, they explicitly said that underrunning or overrunning really is not the issue and doesn't relate. It's interesting to look at the differences, but it really doesn't relate to the issue because there's so many other factors that made the physics of the Valhalla accident play out like it did.
Well, for the record, the configuration of the third rail, besides being an over and under, the leading edge is configured differently, so that the leading edge, when you're running under, would tend to exert force in the upward direction as opposed to the leading edge of the third rail, say in a Long Island Railroad, that tilts down, the pressure goes down. So in that sense, there is a greater mechanical advantage that, this is, I'm a mechanic, that's about all I really know. So this sort of stuff is, that's what happened here, is the leading edge got caught. And, me personally, I think there are simple fixes that you could be looking into, not fixes, but a little bit of protection here that against this happening again.
I appreciate and respect your comments, and I'm confident there'll be more discussion. Also in the pillar of safety risk management, obviously the risk of sleep apnea is a risk that we're managing, so I wanted to just give a very quick, I hope, update on where we stand on that. We had told you some time ago that our plan was to complete all of our screenings for our locomotive engineers and, oh, I'm sorry, we had told you some time ago our plan was to complete the screening of our locomotive engineers and train operators by the end of May. We have essentially completed all screenings for locomotive engineers at both railroads. There are some onesie-twosies that are not screened, but they are not currently in service. That's why I'm weaseling to avoid saying 100%, but it's effectively 100%. We remain on track to complete screenings for all train operators at New York City Transit by the end of May, and bus operators will follow in completion this summer. So I think that's a very serious success. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the last pillar of safety promotion very quickly. Ronnie challenged us in the wake of the employee fatalities that we were discussing just a few moments ago to work together as the MTA family of agencies and produce a brochure that really stresses the importance of always being aware of your surroundings every step of the day. And this is not the actual brochure, but it follows the same format. We have produced a template, and the agencies have populated the brochure with representative photographs that work for their own operating environments. The brochures are now in production, being printed at appropriate quantities for each of the agencies, and we'll obviously have more to share with you soon. But the idea behind these brochures and Ronnie's challenge to all of us is to reach out and personally interact with as many of our employees as we can and communicate through this brochure how important it is to send them home safely at the end of every single work tour. So that is an activity that's underway as well. All right, so I apologize for taking so much. Mr. Greenberg. Oh, sorry.
Yes, on employee fitness generally, but on sleep apnea specifically, New York and Atlantic is included in our program, or do they have their own? And the same thing. That's one question.
So as a separate entity, they have their own.
Mm-hmm.
They actually are part of Anacostia Rail Holdings, so there's multiple short line railroads in there. What is the phrase? Imitation is the best form of flattery. They have, we've worked very closely with them. They've taken program documents that Ann is the principal author of and customized themselves to their operation, and they are much smaller. I think they have 33 locomotive engineers, and they have screened all of them as well. So while they're not included in our program, they're part of the family.
Okay, and see, that goes with CSX because they operate on Metro North, and we have other. What happens with CSX? Because they are operating over our tracks.
Yeah, and we certainly share all of our work industry-wide, so it's available to them. We certainly can't direct them to do anything, and I'm not familiar exactly with what CSX is unless anyone else knows. No. We can find out if they've got an ongoing program, but we do share industry-wide all of our materials. So.
Well, my concern is we share tracks with them, and I assume Amtrak has an aggressive program with this, because, yeah, I thought so.
As well as Amtrak, not merely to, although he is a very important voice in this, Mr. Greenberg, but to all the members of the Safety Committee.
Very good. We will do that. With your permission, we move on to Agenda Item 6, and we have two presentations to provide the committee this morning. The first, Peter Kohner of Capital Construction to talk about construction safety.
Before we get into the presentation, what you will see today is a brief overview of how we prosecute safety over all of our programs on MTACC projects. A safety commitment begins at the top of our organization, executive office, where accountability for safety is being challenged every day. The message for safety is shared with all of our top management, including contractor, with the main effort is to change the behavior of our workers with the recognition that they are not only responsible for their own safety, but for the safety of their colleagues, as situational awareness at all times. So fundamentals of safety, it's a collaborative effort between the contractor, MTA-CC programs, and OSIP. It is a leadership commitment to safety, contractor safety compliance, planning and process control, stakeholder communications, drug and alcohol policy compliance, contractor labor management engagement, and analytics, audits, reports, trend analysis, and reviews, accountability to the executive management. How does it work? It is a continuous improvement process. MTA-CC reviews contractor safety. This is a monthly effort that is shared with the contractors, and we jointly develop strategy that addresses issues that we, throughout the months, address and report. Strategy gets implemented, process begins all over again. Continuous improvement, it's a leading indicator strategy that we adopted at MTA-CC in 2014. What is it? It's an operational process control, audits of contractors' performance, lagging indicator conversion, a trend analysis, leading indicators implementation initiative. Identify 3 to 5 lagging indicators, develop process to implement. As of late, we have adopted a ladder safety, a reduction or elimination of A-frame ladders and a substitute for other devices that would prevent injuries to our workers. Better housekeeping in terms of walkways, egress and exits, site management organization that also yields an efficiency. It also yields less material handling injuries. We also implemented a fall protection program, and we are afoot in developing a incentive program for a new project at the third rail. We select implementation team through contract OSIP and MTA-CC, where we review what we do, we implement, and then we measure the results and we communicate back to the workers and management alike. Contractor compliance monitoring. It is an ongoing process. It is numerous to name, but it basically deals with a review of safety programs, safe work plan review, construction work plan review, readiness review meetings, review hazard log reports, checklist development, job progress meeting, drug and alcohol reviews and adherence, monthly safety review, MTA-CC, contractor, OSIP, and the construction management. How do we do it? Daily walkthroughs, daily operational risk assessment and reports, daily hazard logs, bi-weekly job hazard assessment team reviews, executive walkthrough. All executives of the management and contractors participate in monthly walkthroughs. Monthly program safety meetings where everybody gets together, we discuss best work practices. Quarterly assessment where we, on a quarterly basis, aggregate 3 monthly results that are similar to the quarterly and create a 1 quarterly. And finally, ACE evaluation. Just to give you some examples of analysis of injuries, this is just a glimpse. We classify it by trade, hazard category, worker duration on a project, and worker time in trade. And that is an interesting sort of a statistic if you look at the 2 bottom ones. The duration of work on a project is during the time of onboarding. So the leading indicators basically tell us, the lagging indicators tell us that the leading indicators should focus on education, training, onboarding, understanding what is at risk and how do we proceed. If you look at the worker time in trade, it's another interesting statistics. 1 year or less, and then greater than 10 years. It shows you that there's a level of complacency, lack of situational awareness, and basically some bad habits are very hard to break. So that's another ongoing training and education that we provide through our contractors. What you will see now is a video that we put together that goes back to 2013, and it shows as an aggregate cumulative record for all our projects when it comes to lost time incidents. And I think even though this was a task that we began a long time ago, I think it started to bear some fruits. So the red line represents the BLS standard that is basically put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the crawling sort of a worm shows you how we have accomplished the task ahead. And as you can see, the results are good, and we continue to strive to do better than we did last year. Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I can just add one point, which is that it happens that we're having this presentation in the week that I also talked about East Side Access. And one of the elements of the cost increase on East Side Access is insurance, especially the OSIP insurance. And in addition to being important for all the reasons that this committee, this committee exists, and the value that the organization places on worker safety, this is also a strategy for managing our cost exposure. A very significant piece of the insurance cost is, in effect, a pool that is now set aside where you self-fund claims and compensation for injuries. And so if, as a result of a couple of the initiatives that we've taken, the ladder program, it sounds pedestrian, but it is. There are a huge number of injuries which are compensable and lead to lost time from falls from ladders and so on, the walkway program and so on. If you can just eliminate literally a relatively small number of those, you may be able to preserve some of that claims fund. And it's part of a strategy that we've been implementing in the last 6 or 9 months with respect to the mega projects.
Mr. Zuckerman has a question.
Thank you, sir. Jano, you triggered a question. Given that most of the capital construction is done through contractors, why is it that we have to pay for the insurance?
We don't have to, but it's a strategy for saving money, that they would in effect bake if they were providing their own insurance, they bake it into the cost. And normally you would evaluate the cost of the contractors providing their own insurance versus the owner. And it's an ongoing debate about which is better. There are pluses and minuses, and then you look at it on each project.
So, I guess a question. Most of the work that's transpiring now is off-property work or work that's behind the scenes. But can you speak to what training that we're aware of is going on for contractors that are working closer to the right-of-way, that are in greater risk, and that are assigned to our employees' protection?
So all our workers that work anywhere near, matter of fact, all our workers, for example, on 2nd Avenue, had to go through a track training. Whether they work near or not, they require that. So all our workers would participate in any training that is required by the railroads. The same thing applies for Long Island Railroad, where we're working now on 3rd track and double track. All the workers have to go through the prerequisite training before they can even enter the property. So that is a prerequisite that we insist on. They have to have ID cards on them all the time, at all times. So, anybody who doesn't have it gets removed from the work site unless he produces the document.
So I'm very familiar with that procedure. I also know that contractors get very limited training, yearly training, to be on our property. So the role to protect them on our property is a higher level. Can we recognize or at least make sure that we keep that on our radar, especially on Long Island, where the projects are bigger and growing, and the levels of protection that have to be provided for contractors who are not railroads really needs to be at a higher level than it is for railroad workers who are much more familiar with our process?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, maybe I should ask this earlier, but it's in the statistics provided for Cortlandt Street. There's a large number for recordable injury rate, almost as if you'd think there was some accident that maybe caused that. Was there some incident that happened?
Look at the numbers.
Yeah.
The lower the hours, the higher the spike, right? So unfortunately, it's a mathematical equation. The problem is that once it spikes, it takes a much longer time to drag it down. So if you were to go into the annals of history on East Side Access, to date, we're still paying for the sins of our fathers. In other words, going back to the inception, and you know very well because you were involved in it. So, again, we are diligent and vigilant in enforcing of safety, and it is something we take very seriously. We do root cause analysis, we do stand downs, we do daily risk assessments. You know, all of that still puts, you know, all of that is still subject to situational awareness. And that is what we're really trying to drive home. That is our number one initiative today afoot that we're trying to work at.
Our final presentation is to be delivered by Eric Osnes and Adam Hartke to talk to us a little bit about the I think, very exciting Waze partnership at Bridges and Tunnels.
Okay. During our committee meetings, we provided information on various controls related to a collision mitigation strategy that corresponds to some basic safety principles of engineering, education, and enforcement. Our interaction with the navigation apps underscores the educational component of that strategy. Adam Hartke, who works for Bridges and Tunnels Planning and Budget, who's sitting to my right, has done tremendous work in garnering relationships with the Waze management teams, and is really truly the reason why we're able to have this discussion this morning. So we have a presentation on how we're interfacing with Waze, and I will yield the floor to my, my good friend here.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so our journey, Bridges and Tunnels' journey interacting with third-party mapping apps began in earnest roughly a year ago in 2017 with the transformative effects of cashless tolling. So these were toll plazas, you know, their footprints date back to the Robert Moses era that needed to be updated within these mapping apps. And so we, through this process, we began to reach out to them in earnest. And then also another genesis of reaching out to them is this is another way of customers, you know, consume information about our facilities. And we ask every year in our annual customer satisfaction survey how customers get information, travel information. And in 2014, it was roughly 29%. And in 2017, in the summer, it was up to roughly 63% that consumed either Google Maps or Waze, in addition to a myriad of other outlets to get travel information. And so with this in mind, we began in earnest to outreach specifically to Waze.
And Waze works by crowdsourcing. So those that are on the road can interface with the Waze application, and there are safety controls that are put in place to make sure that to reduce the distracted driving phenomenon. But that's in essence how the program works, as well as Waze is actually managed through volunteer map editors. And it's through the interface with those map editors that we're able to make some real-world changes to the information that's actually provided to the motorist.
And one of the programs that Waze offers specifically is the Connected Citizen Program. And so what this does is this is a two-way interface for traditional partners, which would be DOTs, city agencies, or roadway operators like ourselves, in addition to other partners that create traffic impacts or, you know, have to rely on traffic in some capacity, to create a two-way data exchange with Waze, and that these organizations provide up-to-date information about their facilities or roadway conditions, and in return they get travel time information and various updates and a built-in relationship to interact with the other partners in Waze as a whole. And this is an international program that spans from organizations in Europe to us here in New York City to the Port Authority across the river.
So to bring it home to the safety function, the ability for us to interact with the motorist and to have that message accurately conveyed to the motorists while they're driving as far as the conditions of our roadways, we feel because of that interaction and because of the information that they're receiving actually reduces or would tend to reduce the distracted driving phenomenon. We have a real-world example of this at the Bronx Whitestone. There was a decision point where you could cross over into the Bronx Whitestone lane or to the Cross Island lane, and we wanted to make sure that the Waze application actually depicted that decision point. And we tested to make sure that that decision point was accurate to the roadway condition. So again, that interaction of the changes to our roadway, decision points within our roadways, and the fact that we can communicate that real time to the motorist is something that we feel is of the benefit as far as a positive reinforcer and driving positive behavior to that motorist. We're also able to provide information on construction activity, so that also is an awareness to the construction worker as well as our workers that would be on the roadways. Any closures, weather notifications that we're going to speak about now. We had a real-world event that we're going to underscore, and Adam alluded to the two-way information that we can get as we get more involved into this and gather more data through the Waze application, that we can actually utilize this for trend analysis and potentially traffic planning.
And so here's a timeline of our progress to date. So we entered an agreement with Waze, the Connected Citizen program, roughly a year ago. And since that time, we've leaned heavily on the Port Authority in terms of their best practices and to kind of show us the way and how to utilize this platform to the best of its ability. And so, in that time, we've had a chance to make some major updates to the map. As Eric said, we updated a decision point at the Bronx Whitestone. We've also update regularly the Queens Midtown Tunnel Sandy closures for the weekends and the overnights. In the Queens to Midtown Tunnel as well, we've worked with the map editors to reconfigure the tunnel and the entrance and exit points to make sure that it now aligns with the current cashless tolling layouts. And in addition to that, we've added HOV segments to the Verrazano and the Queens Mid and the Long Island Expressway, and we are now training our staff within our command center to better utilize these tools to where they can enter up-to-date real-time information in real time. And so here's an example of a recent closure that we posted on Waze. And so back in March, when we had the spring-winter storms, we had to close the upper level of the Verrazano Bridge several times because of adverse wind and winter weather conditions. And so in real time, we were able to, while we were closing the roadway and alerting our regional partners and updating the variable message signage, we were able to enter in Waze that the upper roadway would be closed. And once we entered that information, within 2 minutes, this candy cane went live. And essentially what this does is that this reroutes drivers to the lower level, and also gives a very powerful visual image that, there is adverse winter conditions and you should alter your route. And so, next slide. And so with that, Waze is owned by Google since 2013. And so Google Maps periodically does scrape data off of Waze. And so that same closure that we entered into Waze showed up on Google Maps within roughly 5 to 10 minutes. And so once we were able to reopen the roadway, conversely, we were able to, within 2 minutes or less, the roadway was able to be reopened by our command center staff, and conversely, the closure disappeared from Google Maps within 5 to 10 minutes.
So as far as alerts are concerned, our command staff is now working simultaneous with Transcom. So any of the information that we're providing to the Transcom function can now be populated on the Waze app. So if one is not paying attention to the other, hopefully we're seeing the message being conveyed through this application as well. And the last slide, as far as next steps are concerned, what I really would like to highlight is the collaborative relationship that we're working with our sister agencies through Ann and Dave we reached out to the Long Island Railroad to see if any of the relationships that we've built can somehow assist them in some of their challenges. And Adam, you actually went to the railroad to speak to some of Lori's people and to convey the information and see if we can explore how this the benefits of these relationships can assist the railroad challenges.
Yeah. And in some of the long-term long-term goals we have, in addition to working with our sister agencies, is to build out an agency-wide framework and how we can incorporate these data sources, both in providing information and using them for our planning and trend analysis purposes. And then in addition to that, Waze has been an excellent partner, but we want to make sure that we can reach out to as many third-party mapping apps as possible. And so we've, myself and other colleagues within Bridges and Tunnels have been able to reach out to Apple Maps and Garmin and kind of to make sure the same information that we're providing elsewhere, also reaches to those outlets, to where the best information about our roadways are on as many, platforms as possible.
Thank you, and very interesting, very enlightening. For a frequent rider of the Throgs Neck Bridge, I understand the assistance it provides in that regard. Taking it to the next step, you had mentioned your work with the railroad, and I was going to ask the same question because obviously one of our major issues that have come up at the railroad meetings is the grade crossing issue. And one of the reasons grade crossing accidents happen is because people make a turn and end up on the tracks when they're supposed to make a turn and end up on a street. And so my question was going to be, are we able to use the information we have in relation to working with the mapping entities to somehow put whatever terminology we need to do from a technology standpoint in a place to tell people not to make a right turn or a left turn on the tracks in some fashion, because that would obviously help.
We're very appreciative to Adam coming out and Eric connecting us to Adam to do that, and we're very excited about the opportunity that this presents to us. So we're looking at essentially perhaps 4 uses for this particular tool. As we've frequently talked about, our challenge continues to be at grade crossings that there are those folks that will turn on tracks. And to the point about distracted driving, it may be as simple as having a message as you're approaching a grade crossing, don't turn on tracks. And in Adam's demonstration of the user-friendly application, we think that that's something that we can very easily do once we get rolling with the process. The second thing that also might be a benefit is bridges, because often we have the bridge strikes as well.
Right.
So we're looking at perhaps also leveraging the information ability to be able to alert people as they're approaching bridges about the height of the bridges. In addition, we're also very conscious of our obligation to the communities that we serve. So the other 2 applications for this technology that we are envisioning is if we ourselves have some type of construction on a grade crossing, if folks in that community are alerted to that ahead of time, they can plan their travel accordingly. And even if we do have an unfortunate event at a particular grade crossing location, because this basically posts within 5 minutes of somebody plugging in the alert, 2 minutes of it plugging in the alert, that we can also alert folks so that they can plan accordingly, because we also are very conscious that a lot of our grade crossings go through communities, so it's not just our customers that are being impacted, but also the communities, in the localities. So we're very excited about the opportunity that this presents, and we're really looking to move forward with this aggressively and leverage those wonderful relationships that Bridges and Tunnels was able to establish.
And I just wanted to add, in the spirit of sharing best safety practices around agencies, Justin is obviously working at Metro North to explore very similar kinds of activities as well. So we won't leave Metro North out of this fun either.
You can expect a "do not make this right turn, you idiot" on the Waze aspect on the app coming up in that regard, or some more tactful language in that regard.
We can politely ask.
if any surviving victims who have been directed to go onto a railroad track, or their families have sued Google Maps or Waze for this ridiculous directional oddity that they have in some cases? I mean, we also saw one tell a bike rider to go through the Lincoln Tunnel, as I recall, directed by Waze. So has anybody ever sued the companies? Do you know?
We'd have to research that and get back to you.
And as a Waze user, they are getting smarter about providing, so is Google Maps, directions that are appropriate to motorcycles, pedestrians, overheight vehicles, and whatnot. And, you know, there's also as in low visibility conditions, if you're told turn right ahead, the next opportunity you see to turn right is where the white edge line stops and it looks like a street. So there are programs underway to attempt to address that as well. So there's a lot of moving parts.
A little responsibility to be looking out while they're turning as well.
Absolutely, but we want to engineer the best environment we can for every user.
Is there anyone else? Mr. Brown?
Yeah, so me personally, I don't really buy that the Waze forced the person to go on the railroad track. But, you know, I'm skeptical about a lot of things, and maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But regardless, the railroad paid for the whole thing. It was a big accident. It cost a lot of lost time, and somebody was responsible. I don't really necessarily believe it was Waze, but the insurance company of the driver should, or somebody should have the financial responsibility. I don't believe there was an accident or no physical injury in that, right, Vinny? That in the last one. Yeah, Floral Park was. So, you know, thank God they got out of the vehicle in time. But you know, in those circumstances, the railroad ends up bearing the responsibility, but it's really the interface between the Waze and the driver that concerns me. And I think you guys will get wonderful data from, who's the bridge guy, from Waze as to how to manage your facilities. I think you're going to get a lot of good information from them. And they may be providing wonderful information to the drivers as well. However, I personally I believe that expedites their trip and makes them enjoy their trip more, and maybe a faster trip. I don't believe it makes it a safer trip. I don't believe anything that distracts that driver from paying attention to the highway makes his ride safer. And you guys are your responsibility for the safety. I respect you're deep into the relationship with Waze. You're not going to bag it over the opinion of a non-voting board member. But really, I don't see how it's a very difficult job to drive on our roads. And when you get to these decision points, as Eric put it, I mean, it's a very important consideration. These are decision points. I mean, I'm listening to the radio. That's distracting too, listening to the radio. If you're the only one in that vehicle and you're looking at that computer, you're a problem driver. I don't care how sober you are. You're a problem driver. And Waze, this is great. This is great technology, and you're deep into the relationship. You're going to get good data from it, but it's not making our bridges safer. IMHO.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
You're welcome, Freddie.
We're at the end of our agenda, so I will ask Mr. Mayor for his valedictory look back in a brief way. Mr. Mayor.
Just a few very quick closing comments. I know we've used a lot of time here. First of all, in the Department of Improbable Events, I have judged this candy cane went live to be the absolute most improbable thing ever said before the Safety Committee. Two, in our own Connected Citizens program regarding the question about sleep apnea and CSX. That's an important question which can be answered. I don't have the answer right at the moment for it, but it's been suggested to point out to you that on Metro North Territory, CSX currently operates with cab signal overspeed protection as it operates over Spuyten Duyvil and Yonkers curves. This fall, that will, in our move toward full positive train control, that will evolve to civil speed enforcement and then ultimately full positive train control. So that's not to suggest that sleep apnea screening is not important. It's just all parts of layers in the overall safety matrix. And finally, I did want to recognize Jim Bromfield before we adjourn. Jim, who is here for Carl Heyman today, has been a fabulous partner in safety, and at the end of May, he'll be retiring from New York City Transit with 35 years of service. Thank you, Jim.
But as I understand it, has a son continuing to serve? No? Okay.
I've had 2 brothers in the authority, and my dad was in the authority as well. So this ends the legacy.
Then we wish you well. Anyone else? You done? Motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor. The meeting's adjourned.